Robbie Soav and Bree, who we've had a disagreement about, but we're very much aligned on this Palestine issue.
That's been the nice thing about some of this, is even though I've definitely had disagreements with Bree in the past.
And I'm sure it's probably somewhat mutual, but still, like, you know, that's not important, frankly.
Right, we're all
in our jobs.
A lot of people are uniting on this one issue, and this is like exactly how it should be.
And I've not been surprised that Bree's good on this, but I have been shocked at how bad Robbie is. And so what he starts off here saying here, and I don't know if we have the clip in sound polls, but what I will say is Robbie says that students formed a human chain to stop Jewish students from coming on campus. The direct quote, and you even need to pull it over if you can find it, but like the direct thing they said is Zionists. Like, we need a human chain for Zionists because they are trying to infiltrate and probably maybe stage something like, ooh, a Palestinian stabbing me in the eye with a mask, or I'm going to deploy some fart spray that is going to be so overwhelming that people have to go to the hospital for it. So it is valid to not want Zionists at a protesting a Zionist genocide.
Yes.
So that's when you'll see right off the bat here Robbie lying in a way that he did again. Robbie and Brie had John Ben Menachem on the Columbia PhD student who and Robbie he didn't say the thing that they said it was anti-Jewish, but he still repeated this, and I think it's indicative of the whole libertarian free speech sort of way that they're folding to Zionism in this a completely urgent moment about free speech.
Among all of the groups who are not financially implicated by these kinds of corporatized arrangements. And
they're forming human chains to prevent Jewish students from moving among their midst. They absolutely did that.
Robbie.
Well, first of all, Jewish students are being overrepresented in these protests.
Yep.
The young Jewish left because this is being done in the name of Judaism, or they're exploiting Judaism to commit a genocide. Young Jewish students on college campuses we don't have the statistics right now.
Absolutely overrepresented.
But they are absolutely overrepresented in the arrests made on these college campuses. So the idea that this is to keep Jewish students out of these protests, when Jewish students are leading this, Jewish Voice for Peace, and they're a part of the other solidarity organizations on campus, is a smear and a lie.
Yep.
Students from moving among their midst.
That's not true.
They absolutely did that.
Robbie, at NYU, I'm describing a specific incident in which university professors came out and created a circle around students in prayer. A Passover prayer, as they were being attacked by the NYPD, handcuffed and arrested. That's what happened in the United States of America. And I thought that we cared about free speech sitting here on this program. I thought we cared about your rights to protest and articulate your values.
I care about
And college students are being called now for the National Guard to be sent. Do you know who was killed at Kent State by the National Guard? 3 of the 4 of those students were Jewish students. So who here is really standing up for and protecting the rights and interests of Jewish students as you call for them to be rounded up by the police?
I'm not calling for them to be rounded up by the police. I don't think the police should be involved.
You criticize this behavior because the administration of NYU called those police in. Yeah. And the professors wrote that statement to say this was not a violent protest. This was not an anti-Semitic protest. This was students protesting actual violence in Palestine. I don't know that it's not
violent or not anti-Semitic, but I don't think the police should be called in to deal with it. I think this is an academic matter. If students don't show up to their classes or to their exams,
it was at night.
Be dealt with that way.
What are you talking about?
Planning at Columbia, they're planning to occupy the campus until the right to return is regranted to Palestinians displaced from Gaza?
The students are not the ones that called for remote work.
Can you pause it for a sec?
Doing that, and some people.
No, she's right about this, but I just want to clarify too. Like the demands from the students are incredibly clear for Israel, for their universities rather, to divest from Israel. Just like the demonstrations against South African apartheid, that is the claim. And they say we won't remove these encampments until the divestment happens. That is the demand. They have been unambiguous about it.
Demanding the university drop its direct investments in companies doing business in or with Israel, which are part of 1.2, including Amazon and Google, which are part of $1.2 billion cloud computing contract with Israel's government, which also, by the way, is a problem with Google employees, I believe, who were surprised to learn some of that because I don't think it was entirely upfront. Microsoft, whose services are used by Israel's Ministry of Defense and the Israeli Civil Administration, and defense contractors profiting from war, such as Lockheed Martin, which on today reported its earnings were up 14%, not 14,000%, but also, first of all, like this idea, like I'm not saying they should be rounded up. I'm just saying they might be doing violence against Jewish kids on campus. Like that's not that. Sorry, Robbie, you are helping the effort to get these people beaten by cops.
You know, no. You know what the reality is, and what it's so like, what is so gratifying, and how they'll lose in the end as they thrash about to smear these protesters is they're just genuinely frustrated that the kids learned how to be incredibly militant and effective in their demonstrations, clear in their demands. I saw that I mentioned this earlier, but that a reporter was outraged that the organized demonstrations have a spokesperson and that they just can't go when they go up to random students. They refer them to the spokesperson, which is, by the way, a direct reaction to Occupy when people were singled out to represent the entire movement, and it was a way for the media to call them crazy, and they'd take the most inflammatory things said by the demonstrators and make Occupy smear the Occupy movement, basically. And they learned from the George Floyd protests as well to link arms together and to be unified. So they're just pissed that the kids are so good at this. I mean, and that is what's so amazing about it. They're just, and you would never hear the press can't complain that when they reach out to a senator for comment, that their spokesperson responds, or the police for a comment when a police spokesperson responds. They would never complain, but because it's kids that are doing things that are anti-Zionist and their tactics are well thought out, they're just like agitated and grinding their teeth.
Yeah, and just the condescension as he, again, starts it off with a lie saying they won't let Jewish students in. As we know, Jewish students are overrepresented, and it was Zionists that they were against you. But the condescension of, like, what are they going to do, protest until the right of return is granted? Sorry, can we just remind people what the right of return is? The right of return is that the refugees who were displaced by the Nakba get to go back to where they were displaced from. The idea that that is far-fetched, even though it's, like, enshrined in international law, is Zionist propaganda, and it is actually naturalizing a whole bunch more violence than is being like spoken of by protesters at Columbia. That is the pro-violent speech, Robbie, that we actually need to urgently deal with. You are reproducing it right there.
The students are not the ones that called for remote work. The administration is doing that, and some people think as a cudgel to try to make it seem as though the students are actually disrupting the functioning of the university in a way that they frankly are not.
They clearly are, though. There's going to be no in-person classes, compromising the educational processes at the university, and then they're going to complain later that they can't get jobs and we have to pay for their student loans.
Well, it seems
wonderful.
It seems like this is really backfiring. The Columbia
on the protesters?
Columbia's choice to be so draconian and authoritarian with their protests immediately has sparked now at least half a dozen other campuses across the country to set up similar kinds of encampments. And there was much more police presence in the New York instance because, unlike Columbia, which is on private property, NYU is a university that's obviously embedded in the streets of New York. And so the university president there was able to call the police on these protesters, which is, I think, why it was so important for so many of the adult faculty members to come out and show such strong solidarity with them and for the safety of their students.
Conservatives are still calling for Shafik to resign and the heads of these other universities to resign. Whatever they're doing, they're not up.
All right, that's it.
Maybe just go to the last minute because I think they wrap.
I mean, she completely cornered him on his point about being It's amazing how the right has just entirely abandoned their calls for free speech now that it doesn't align with the with leftist college students, basically.
I mean, even the text is saying, like previously when people were showing up with swastika flags on, hey, you know what can we do? It's free speech. Members of the public can show up. And then now it's, oh, no members of the public can show up. This is just
and they don't even respect their audience enough to like actually address it. They just move on from it. They don't address their past hypocrisy because it was useful at one time and now it's not useful.
Exactly. It's all in the moment. But I just wanted this wrapped up in a way that I thought, you know,
okay.
I like conflict, so I like it.
He wasn't arrested and hauled away. What are you talking about?
Doesn't he have a free speech right to be on the campus as well, to protest and to engage in?
Pause it just real quick.
His card was deactivated.
Doesn't that professor have a right to go on and call students capos and terrorists?
Terrorists!
I think the university is right to fire him, and I think the university should allow the students to be on the park field, setting up an encampment, protesting their university's involvement in genocide. I think this is actually fairly easy to square. Go ahead, Bradley.
Interfaith Shabbat dinner, that and prayer session. That's the event. That's one of the events that these professors were protecting at NYU. And outside agitators, people in Columbia, it was much easier to see because it's a private institution. People who didn't have access to the university, including Shai Davidai, the professor you mentioned, who's under investigation for doxing and attacking students. That's why his key card isn't working anymore.
Oh, so he should be arrested and hauled away.
He wasn't arrested and hauled away. What are you talking about?
Doesn't he have a free speech right to be on the campus as well, to protest and to engage in?
His card was deactivated because he was harassing students and he's under investigation.
Okay, he's harassing students, but the protesters there who they're trying to deal with, they're not harassing anyone.
Yes.
Yeah, he's a faculty member who has an obligation not to dox and harass students.
You found someone involved in these protests who is worthy of discipline. I'm amazed by it. All right. I think we're going to be talking about this additionally with an expert from the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression coming up next.
Robbie, answer this question. Do you think the National Guard should be sent in to round up these students per Tom Cotton and number of conservatives? I'm so glad that you have found somebody you're willing to condemn in the context of the
I have no problem condemning.
All right, more rising coming up after this.
Ooh. All right, this is this freak Shai Davidai, and this is what he was doing, running around the campus demanding that the National Guard get sent on the student body that pays, in theory, his bills. Yeah. I mean, and by the way, he is a complete minority. I have been so inspired to see the faculty linking arms with their students and literally, and also getting arrested and roughed up, as we saw at Emory University, professors literally getting thrown to the ground violently, a female professor, by the way, by police. This guy's a complete in the minority. The faculty and student body are united against an administration that is not interested in education. They're interested in their benefactors.
Yeah. I mean, this is a perfect encapsulation of the libertarian approach to free speech, which is like, I'm concerned about the guy with authority not allowed to exercise his authority to support doxing students, like the Canary Mission, where you go to kids' neighborhoods and say, hey, this kid supporting Palestine is actually a terrorist, and you put a giant billboard up in their neighborhood. That's the free speech that Robbie Soav and probably Fire.org too, who I think maybe is being shunned a little bit into not being complete Zionist sellouts in the free speech issue. But that's where libertarian free speech is at on that. And it is a disgrace. It is exactly the sort of disgrace that we have always been calling it when these people say, oh, you know what? Speech isn't violence. Let people do it. All of a sudden now it's Jewish students being attacked when actually it's Zionists being kept out of an encampment that they're probably trying to do stage bullshit in. I mean, it couldn't be a perfect representation of how BS libertarians are on this issue. Just really quickly, this is the freak that he's defending.
I know it's painful to say this. I know there's a fraud history in the United States with U.S. colleges, but it's time to bring in the National Guard because the NYPD is in over their head. Obviously, the President Shafiq and the administration are unwilling to do anything about this. I know it's painful. So
the NYPD is to the left of the administration of Columbia because they have said that they did not receive any threats of violence.
That guy calling for
towards the students.
That guy calling for the National Guard to come Kent State students is just doing free speech.
Oh, and I just want to be precise in my language. No threats to Jewish students from within the demonstrators. They did not receive, or they did not see violence towards Jewish students from the demonstrators.
I have seen violence from Zionist protesters at these encampments telling those anti-Zionists to go to Gaza. And we know what's happening in Gaza is Gaza's being bombed into smithereens. So what I take from those IDF or those Israeli supporting Zionist protesters is that they want violence to happen to those protesters. Now, I think it should be in their freedom of speech rights to say that, and we'll just make content out of it. But yeah, like I can't. I appreciate Bree going at Robbie there, because it's all the back and forth of like, I don't actually support the National Guard being called in, but I am going to position as the victim here the guy who was calling for the National Guard to be called in on students he's supposed to be caring for. And I'm sorry, like, also, this isn't just a free speech issue. This is a genocide issue. Mm-hmm. This is Israel is doing a genocide, and they're having their assets in U.S. media avert your gaze onto college students that are being righteous about it on it. So Robbie, you are the person that we're coming after now. Like, we're not this sort of thing. Josh Marshall too, calling these protesters Charlottesville. This is a material support of a genocide. This isn't just, we're talking about the issues of the day. This job actually has some meaning in the world, and I like, this is like Sam Harris talking about like, what's wrong with torture at the time we're having that debate. Right. You cannot do this in these moments. At a certain point, it's test time. Oh, and yes. Robbie's failing it.
Well, I mean, come on. Like, then they go hands off. Like, oh, we're just having this conversation outside of the context of literally the urgent moment that we are living in, right? And then, oh, but like, we can't engage in theoretical conversation anymore about the nature of torture, about like, you know, who's more aggrieved right now? The Zionists living in comfort in the United States, or you know, the Palestinians who are starving to death and who lost their entire family. It's like, yeah, we can engage in that thought experiment, or we could deal with the urgent realities of politics and the way that we've constructed our world in a way that, you know, is respective to the crisis that we see.
Yeah. So if you're going to start exaggerating the threat that posed by students who are just trying to stop a genocide, just know that this heat is not one that I don't think people that are on our side should be afraid of, because it should have been turned up a long time ago. This is an issue that needs a lot more light, and there's no light without heat.